They knew him better than the world ever could, but even they couldn't fully explain his genius. This is what really made Eddie Van Halen. When Steve Lukather and Sammy Hagar sit down and start talking about Eddie Van Halen, it never feels like a formal interview. It feels like memory spilling out in real time, raw, honest, and filled with moments that shaped rock history. There's something different about the way they talk about him. It's not just admiration, it's respect. Mixed with disbelief, like even they still can't fully process what Eddie actually was. Lukather leans back, almost smiling before he even starts, like he already knows no story he tells will truly capture the whole picture. He talks about the first time he really understood Eddie wasn't just another great guitarist, he was something else entirely. Not just talent, but instinct. Not just skill, but vision. And Sammy nods along because he's lived inside that world, on stage, in the studio, in the chaos and the magic that came with being in Van Halen. The conversation drifts naturally, no script, no structure, just stories unfolding. Lukather recalls walking into a studio session where Eddie was casually experimenting, not trying to impress anyone, just chasing a sound in his head. That's what stood out the most. Eddie didn't play for validation. He played because he had to, like it was the only way he knew how to exist. And when he found something new, something no one had heard before, he didn't celebrate it. He just moved on to the next idea. Sammy jumps in, laughing a little, saying people think they know Eddie from the outside, the flashy solos, the wild stage energy, but they don't see the quiet moments. The moments where Eddie would sit for hours, completely locked into his guitar, chasing perfection in a way that wasn't about ego. It was about expression. There's a pause in the conversation, not awkward, but heavy. Because talking about Eddie always brings that weight. The realization that someone who felt so larger than life is no longer here. Lukather mentions how Eddie changed the rules without ever announcing it. There was no declaration, no statement. One day the guitar sounded one way, and the next day, after Eddie, it sounded completely different. And everyone else had to catch up. Sammy reflects on what it was like being inside that storm of creativity. He talks about writing songs together, how unpredictable it could be. Some days Eddie would walk in with a complete idea, fully formed, ready to go. Other days it would start with a single riff, something small, something rough, and somehow it would evolve into something massive. And that process, that unpredictability, that was the real magic. Lukather adds that Eddie had this rare ability to make complexity feel effortless. Guitar players knew how difficult what he was doing actually was, but the average listener just felt it. That's what made him universal. You didn't need to understand the technique to be moved by it. Sammy smiles at that because he knows exactly what that means. He talks about performing those songs live, feeling the energy from the crowd, knowing that what they were playing wasn't just music, it was something people connected to on a deeper level. And Eddie was at the center of it all, not trying to be a legend, just being himself. The conversation starts to slow down a bit. Not because they're running out of things to say, but because every story leads to another memory, and every memory carries emotion. Lukather mentions how Eddie's influence wasn't just about guitar. It was about attitude, about pushing boundaries without asking for permission, about trusting your instincts even when no one else understands what you're trying to do. Sammy agrees, adding that Eddie never followed trends, he created them, and that's why his impact still feels so strong. Because it wasn't built on imitation, it was built on originality. There's a quiet moment where both of them seem to reflect at the same time, not speaking, just remembering. Because when you talk about Eddie, you're not just talking about music. You're talking about a force. Something rare, something that doesn't come around often. And even now, even after everything, it still feels like the world is trying to catch up to what he already did years ago. As the conversation continues, Sammy Hagar starts opening up more about the personal side of Eddie Van Halen, the side fans rarely got to see. He talks about the moments away from the spotlight, when the noise faded and it was just friends hanging out, talking about life, not music. That's where Eddie's real personality came through. Funny, thoughtful, sometimes intense, but always real. Sammy explains that Eddie wasn't someone who pretended. What you saw depended on the moment, but it was always genuine. And that's what made their connection strong, even when things weren't perfect between them. Steve Lukather listens closely, occasionally adding his own perspective, reinforcing how unique Eddie was in every environment. Lukather shares stories about studio sessions where Eddie would suddenly change direction, not because something was wrong, but because he felt there was something better just out of reach. That constant drive, that refusal to settle, defined him. It wasn't about being better than anyone else. It was about being better than yesterday. Sammy reflects on how that mindset influenced everyone around him. When you're working with someone like Eddie, you can't stay comfortable. You either rise to that level or you get left behind. And for Sammy, that pressure turned into inspiration. It pushed him to write differently, perform differently, think differently. He admits there were moments where it was challenging, where the intensity felt overwhelming, but looking back, he wouldn't change a thing, because those moments created something timeless. Lukather brings up the technical side again, but not in a dry, analytical way. He talks about how Eddie approached the guitar like an extension of himself. It wasn't an instrument he played, it was part of how he communicated, and that's why his sound was so distinct.